Hello, everybody, and welcome to a different sort of Frankenstein chat. This is the first of a new version of Frankenstein, which is actually called Spotlight. And today we're going to put the focus on a particular person or a particular topic. And today I'm delighted to say we've got Dennis Sherwood. Hello, Dennis.
Hi, Frankenstein. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, hello. And Dennis is the author of a book called Missing the Mark, a book that I have to admit I've read, apart from the index, every single word of. And I found it really a fascinating read, and one that's really around sort of social justice in a rather unusual way. And it's a lot to do with why are so many school exam grades wrong? And what we're going to do is talk about that today. These spotlights are going to be for about 25 minutes. And we're going to let our guests do a lot of the talking, but we're going to interject. We've got some challenges perhaps that are going to come down the line, and we'll be very interested in what you think about this first spotlight. So before we start, Dennis, do you want to just introduce yourself to those people who've not read the book or don't know who you are?
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm Dennis Sherwood. By profession, I'm an independent management consultant and do a lot of work in corporates, universities, schools, and all of that. I'm very interested in the educational matters, and in particular about the reliability of the grades that are awarded to all our students. About 1.2 million students have just finished GCSE, AS, and A Level now. They're anticipating their results in August, and it's important that they can trust those results.
Yeah, because actually all of this has come together in a book called Missing the Mark. And in a way, that book summarizes probably the last sort of 13 or 14 years, perhaps a little bit longer than that, in terms of the journey, the creation of Ofqual and all of this sort of stuff. I mean, when did you start to get a feeling that there might be something wrong with some of the grades?
It was about 2015. And in 2015, Ofqual, the regulatory exams, went out to consultation to change the rules for appeals. And what they were proposing was the introduction of something that does exist today. It's called the reasonableness test or the marking error test, which says that a review of marking, which is what you get when you challenge a grade, will just check for compliance with the mark scheme and check for a marking error, but will not identify anything which is attributable to legitimate differences in academic opinion between examiners. And when I read that in 2015, I thought that's a bit strange, because everything in exams is about the legitimate opinion of examiners, and senior examiners, in Ofqual's parlance, are special. They deliver the definitive, their word, mark grade.
I suppose the general public also think that when you go for a remark, the whole thing is being looked at, both the checking of the scores, alignment to the grading criteria, and that actually another examiner will be looking at that paper again just to double check. And clearly that changed, didn't it, in 2016?
Yeah, in 2016, they changed that. When you have what is called a review of marking, any candidate now unhappy with their grade can get a review of marking. That is not a remark. It is not another expert taking another view. It's a check that the original examiner did nothing wrong. And there's a huge and important difference between those two.
Now, actually, the book talks about the chance of error is perhaps greater in some subjects than it is in others. Do you want to just sort of give a little bit of background around that as well?
Yeah, well, Ofqual in the early 2010s were alert to this issue of the impact of differences in academic opinion. To make this very clear, Frank, if you were to mark, one of my exam scripts, you might give me, say, 63 marks out of 100, and you're a totally qualified examiner. But Stan, you might look at my script and give me, say, 65 marks.
Yeah, I knew it was going to be that way.
Yeah, yeah,
I am
absolutely
slightly
right.
more generous than Frank.
Absolutely right. Now, neither of you have made any errors. You're both totally entitled to that opinion. They're just different. Everyone knows this in marking exams. Now, if in fact the grade B or whatever is defined as all marks from 61 to 70 inclusive, it doesn't matter about that. But if after the marking has been done, the grade boundary is set at 64 between you, then I get an A from you, Stan, but a B from you, Frank. Now, only one grade, either the A or the B, is on my certificate. It's totally driven by the lottery of which of you two guys did it. And that says, well, which is the right grade?
Mm.
Now, Ofqual resolved that dilemma by saying that, Stan, you are the senior examiner. Your mark, your grade is definitive or true, their words. Now, if this were rare, it wouldn't have much impact. So 2014, 2015, Ofqual did a huge research study where they took whole cohorts of scripts, hundreds of thousands, in 14 different subjects, and they did exactly what we just described. They were all marked by ordinary examiners, qualified, but just like ordinary marking, like Frank. And a second time, they were all marked by a senior examiner in that subject. So every single script, 250,000 geography scripts, had 2 grades from the 2 marks. Now, you might expect that the number of discrepancies would be very small and that those grades would be the same, except in a very rare number of situations, and that would be randomized across the subjects. That's not what happened. What Ofqual discovered, and it was published in 2018, is that if you take, for example, maths, for every 100 scripts in maths, 96 end up with the same grade, but 4 in every 100 end up with different grades. But if you look at something like history, 56 end up with the same grade and 44 end up with different grades. Now, given that the mark attributable to the senior examiner is definitive or true, if in fact a script is given a different mark and therefore a different grade, that must be non-definitive or false. Ofqual give no words for that. Now, if I was a student and I'd had a non-definitive grade remarked, if that were allowed, and given an upgrade to the definitive grade, I would use very simple English. I would say that the senior examiner's grade was right and the original grade that got changed was wrong, because if it wasn't wrong, why change it? Mm. So Ofqual's results show that in general, for maths, 96 right, 4 wrong, history, 56 right, 44 wrong, and a whole variety across the 14 subjects.
Now, I suppose also the government reformed GCSE to actually, well, they in effect tipped up the other way the marking system, and introduced, I think I'm right, more grades, which actually created more fences or more barriers, boundaries, which increased the potential for there being a grade error, didn't it?
Yeah, in 2017, the old Alpha A-star ABC grades in GCSE were replaced for, I think it was English language, English lit, maths in 2017 by 987, and the rest of the subjects in later years. Now, the effect of that was a greater number of grades in the same overall width, so the average width of a grade was lessened, and that makes grades more unreliable. And in fact, in a report dated 2016, Ofqual say that. So they knew in 2017, when they were making the grades narrower, that they would become more unreliable. That was absolutely known at the time.
Now,
I'm sure, sorry, next, I'm sure recently a representative said that their grades were secure and not, secure-ish. So is there a suggestion that since your research they have tightened things up, they have done other things that reduce the risk?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Stan. In fact, as recently as a week or so ago, at the Lords Select Committee, Dr. Joe Saxton, the Chief Executive or the chief regulator at Ofqual, actually said to the Lords Committee, I can assure this committee and every young person taking exams that grades are reliable and that they are fair. So one of the things that has been going on since 2016 is Ofqual have denied the kind of things I have been saying. They do not accept it. And that was one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because Stan, you referred to my research. Actually, it isn't my research. Ofqual did the research. Ofqual printed and published the numbers. And all I'm doing is trying to interpret those numbers and make them well known, because Ofqual sure aren't bending over backwards to give people the information they really need. If I might just add one other thing, this subject has been on the table at select committees, both in the Commons and the Lords, for several years. And something really important happened at a select committee meeting held on the 2nd of September 2020, which was just after the COVID debacle with the algorithm. And one of the witnesses was Dame Glenys Stacey, who'd come in as interim chief regulator after the departure of Sally Collier as a result of the algorithm. At that time, September 2020, people were expecting real exams to come back in 2021. They didn't expect a continuation of the lockdown. And Ian Mearns, the MP for Gateshead, asked Dame Glenys Stacey a question about the reliability of the grades that would be awarded in the future on the assumption they came back. And Dame Glenys Stacey is on record at that time as saying, grades are reliable to one grade either way. Now, that's really worth thinking about. What does a grade reliable to one grade either way mean? And this was a statement from the chief regulator in 2020. That has since been basically denied or stepped away from by current chief regulator, Dr. Joe Saxton.
And obviously, it's obvious to say this, but if you're a student wanting to go to medical school, or a dentist, or wanting to go to one of the, a prestigious university, the difference between getting an A in history and a B in history will be the difference between you being accepted or not. So it's not a minor issue. I think I heard you say that, well, I don't want to put words into your mouth here, Dennis, because I've got to be careful what I say, but it would be easy to say, well, all of this balances itself out. Dennis, your grade might be one out, Stan's might be one up, mine might be one down, but actually in the great scheme of things, everything's fine.
It's very easy to come to that conclusion. For an individual, it makes all the difference in the world.
Does, yeah.
Once again, there was a Lord Select Committee on about the 22nd of June, where Sir John Coles was asked that question. And he said that actually, if you look at the overall statistics, because of the way in which, norm referencing is done, 30% of youngsters fail GCSE English. And that 30% is 30%. But when you look at the individual, it's the wrong 30%. So to me, it makes all the difference in the world. And if I can just pick up the medical school admission bit, some of the numbers are really stark. Most medical schools require 3 A's in, say, chemistry, physics, and biology. If you look at Ofqual's data as published in 2018, they measure the reliabilities of chemistry, physics, and biology. And it's very, very easy to show this, that for every 100 students who have a certificate showing AAA, about 17 of those students actually merited at least 1B. But they've got 3 A's, so they get into med school. Are they underqualified? Will they suffer some stress because they can't cope? And they have kept out the same number of kids who have at least 1B, but who merited 3 A's. So, that's a real example. And it's not just about the fuzziness of a history essay. Chemistry, physics, biology, they have the hard-edged subjects.
Yeah.
So if a student wants to question, they find, do they actually get their raw scores?
They
so
do
they
get
can see how close to the boundary they are.
They can indeed, but the effect I'm talking about, yes, certainly hits grade boundaries. But actually, if you look at it in more detail, and Ofqual have published data on this, even a mark smack bang in the middle of a grade width
Mm.
is still, in most subjects, reliable to one grade either way, and another examiner might have marked it a grade higher or indeed a grade lower.
Yeah, I was just thinking those most likely to appeal will be those who feel as though they are near a boundary,
That
and
is
therefore
that's absolutely true, Stan, but that shows a weakness in the appeals process.
Yeah.
People are kind of encouraged not to appeal if they're in the middle, but for any subject other than about maths, Ofqual's own data showed that you're just as likely to get a higher grade anywhere in the grade boundaries. And if you look at a subject like history or English, you know, the likelihood of getting the wrong grade is about half and half. You may as well flip a coin.
Now, it's also for those people who are not involved in education, that there is a cost to an appeal.
Yeah.
And obviously, I can't. What is the? Do you know what the actual cost is, or does it vary from one examination board to the next, or is it the same across the country?
There's a, you know, Ofqual makes sure that there's not a huge discrepancy in cost. The cost, as the exam boards will tell you, will be refunded if your grade is changed. Statistically, as it turns out, look at the numbers, about 1 in 5 challenges results in a grade change. So you've got a 1 in 5 chance of getting your money back. Now, for many, many state schools, they are very, very disincentivized by having to put the money up front with a 4 in 5 chance of losing it. So the appeals process itself does not deliver justice to young people for that reason, and of course because you can't get a remark.
Yeah.
Special
But didn't Ofqual say?
sorry, Frank, just going back to what you said earlier. If I send my paper in for a remark, all that's happening is the checking that the marks have been given within the marking system. They're not checking the content against the academic judgment.
Right. This is really, really important, Stan.
That's the point I was going to come to, actually.
If you look at the guidelines of what happens for post-results services, if you look at OCR, AQA, Pearson, it says you have a clerical review. That's all about saying, have we added up the numbers right? And has every answer got a mark, or did something get lost? The next thing is a review of marking. Now, to you and me, a review of marking kind of sounds like someone's going to remark it. No, it does not get a remark. What it does is that, Stan, you would check that Frank has not made any marking errors and done something fundamentally wrong. It is not, Stan, you exercising your judgment over the question and saying, well, actually, Frank was a bit tough on poor old candidate number 123 there. That candidate deserves a mark or two more for that question. That was blocked out in 2016. And of course, that is the fundamental problem. If you go to the JCQ website, the overseer of these things, they are explicit. They say this is not a remark, so that someone can see that. And if you go indeed to the SQA website in Scotland, they are clear this is not a remark. But for some reason, AQA, OCR, and Pearson don't make that explicit.
But that's why they can say that, is it less than 1% of appeals or whatever it is successful? They say that 99%, of students get the right grade, don't they? That's where they can fall back on. That's that, and I know that's going to come in the next couple of months, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That's going to be the sort of pillar that keeps the system going.
Yeah. There are two things that get said. Something like only 1% of grades are changed on appeal is trotted out by many, many people. The Minister for Education, Mr. Gibb, has said that. It was said by Pearson, once again, at the Select Committee meeting in front of the Lords. In fact, this is very misleading, because it is true that only 1% of grades are changed on appeal. And that kind of puts in your mind, therefore, the other 99% are right. Now, if you go to the Pearson website today, you will find the statement 99% are right. So they go one step further. They actually say that. Now, this is deliberately misleading, I believe, because it is certainly flawed. The fact of the matter is that only a very small number of grades are appealed, like 4% of the total. So the grades that are changed are by reference to the 4% of appeals, and 1% of the total cohort is about 20% of the appeals. But to say that 1% of grades are changed is proof that the other 99% are right, assumes that the 96% of grades that were not appealed actually would not get changed if they were. Now, no one knows because no one's looked. They could all be wrong, or they could all be subject to appeal. This was the question on the table that Glenys Stacey appreciated in the early 2010s and said, we'd better look. So that triggered all of the research we're talking about. In fact, there's a blog that Glenys Stacey posted on the Ofqual website in sometime, I think, September 2014, which basically says what I just said. And she identifies the flaw in that 1% is changed argument explicitly. And she says, we're going to look into this.
Now, FFT published a blog, a paper I think it was this week, basically looking at which are the hardest of the GCSEs. And they reference, there's a direct link in their piece to your research. So I think one of the challenges for me is why, FFT are quite influential, highly respected organization, do sort of fairly rigorous reviews of data. Why is it that you feel that this, I think, very important research has not got more widely known? You've published the book, you've been out there hammering away, you've been at select committees. Why do you think this has been so difficult to get the public's imagination?
Yeah, that's I wish I knew. Let me just say that FFT Education Data Lab, Dave Thompson there, I have the highest regard for. They do extremely good work. And indeed, we've spoken on many occasions. But there are a couple of things going on about all of this stuff. The whole education system is based on trust and confidence.
Mm.
If you think about it, when a young person in 4 weeks' time or whatever opens that envelope or gets that email or goes to the school and sees history A level grade B, how does that person know it's right or wrong? They don't. There's no yardstick of what it is. There may have been the teacher's assessment or a mock exam or whatever, but that's not the real thing. So the whole thing is based on trust. And the only way that trust gets tested is through the appeal system, which is why the integrity of the appeal system is so important. Now, anything that actually threatens that trust, like when I say 1 grade in 4 is wrong, is a deep threat to the people who with the vested interest in the current system. So no wonder they are reluctant to admit it. Glenys Stacey did.
In your book, you talk about, I think it was 14 possible improvements or could be made. We haven't got time to go through all 14, but are there sort of a couple of big hitters there that you think could be made, perhaps wouldn't sort of see the whole edifice fall?
Yeah, actually, if I might mention 3 quickly, what we want is something on the certificate which is reliable. And that means that if, Frank, you give me a grade and Stan, I ask for an appeal and you look at it again, you confirm the original grade. If you were to change the grade, the original was unreliable. So I'm looking at a very, very high likelihood that a fair remark, a proper review would end up in the same answer. Solution 1, which everyone will be talking about now, is AI. The problem with unreliability is the difference in opinion of different examiners. Now, if there are 700,000 English scripts, and if, Stan, you're the senior examiner, I'm afraid, with the best will in the world, you can't mark 700,000, so Frank and others have to help you, hence the variety problem. If you're an AI algorithm, you're very happy to mark 700,000 scripts and you don't get tired, and we hope that you're using the same standard. So AI is a potential solution in the future, so long as one, we trust it, and two, the algorithm that is used by OCR comes up with exactly the same results, paper by paper by paper, year on year on year, as the algorithm used by Pearson and AQA. Second one, please sit down, is use grades. Grades were invented to solve this problem. In around 1785 at Yale University, the distinguished professors realized that splitting hairs between 65 and 67 or whatever was for the birds. And they said, why don't we just call them 2 1s or whatever they did at the time? So they invented grades so they didn't have to worry about that. But they knew 2 things. And they said the grade widths have to be wide. So the likelihood of straddling the grade boundaries, which is where this problem comes from, is intrinsically low. So the number of scripts that we need to be very careful about reviewing at grade boundaries would be low and manageable. So if a script was close to the first 2-1 boundary or whatever, the examiners would get together and be very careful and very wise at doing that. So grades solve the problem. Of course, what has happened recently, or in the last umpteen years, is the number of scripts has been so huge, grade widths have got progressively narrower, and there ain't no time to do the review. So one solution is to maybe widen the grade widths significantly and be wise at the boundaries. Third solution, very briefly. We're talking about a range of marks. You know, Frank, you gave me 64. Stan, you might have given me 66. Someone else might have given me 61. It's very easy statistically to establish in any subject what that range is. So Frank, if you give me 63, a statistician can say, well, it's very unlikely that someone else will give more than 67 or less than 59. Yep.
Yes.
Or whatever the numbers are.
I think they call this in education term confidence intervals, I think is the term that's used, isn't it?
And let's have confidence in those intervals. So why not show on the certificate 63 plus or minus 5 or whatever? You don't need the grades. That means that someone judging will not have a cliff edge boundary between a 63 and a 64 and a 65. And of course, the important thing is the appeals process. If it shows 63 plus or minus 5 and Stan on appeal, you remark 66, that confirms the original assessment because 66 is within that range. Now, only if the remark were above or below the extrema would the grade be changed. But if the statistics is right, that will happen 99, or confirmation would happen 99.999% of the appeals or the scripts. So they'd be reliable. So there, Frank, there are 3 possibilities. One a bit pie in the sky. One is very real, actually, having wider grades. But the easiest thing to do is just to be honest about it. The mark is fuzzy.
Yeah. And can I, as we bring it to a close, I saw you earlier this week give a presentation online, and you mentioned something about your wife who was brought up in another country, and I think it's quite an interesting thought. Bearing in mind, I think today one of the parties is promoting more importance around oracy. But it's triggered a reminder for me, Dennis. I don't know if you want to finish up with the story that you shared that night.
Yeah. My wife, Annie, is Danish. She went through the Danish educational system. We've got cousins and all that stuff still there. And she just cannot understand anything that is happening in Britain, with our kids, all the stuff I do. When she was about 18 or whatever, and she did the equivalent of A Levels, she'd studied 8 subjects. That was the Danish system at their gymnasium. Around the March of her final year, she was informed of the 3 subjects in which she would be examined. And her colleagues in her class had different combinations of 3 of the 8. For the 5 that were not formally examined, her school leaving certificate shows the teacher assessment, and people trust that as fair. For the 3 subjects in which she was examined, there would be a viva. It wouldn't be a written test, a test of oracy, and also an opportunity to have a bit of dialogue. If you're not quite sure of something, a helpful examiner will say, tell me a bit more about that, or whatever. You know how it is. That process was she would go to the exam room, An hour before the viva, she would be given the exam question, the topic on which the viva would focus. After that hour, she would enter the exam room. There were two people there, her own teacher and an external examiner. And they would have a conversation as triggered by that question, and she would get her grade before she left the room. It's a different way of doing things. And, you know, Danes aren't sort of, sweeping the streets, as it were.
Yeah.
Actually, I know it's back in time, but that happened at college for me. That when there was a dispute over a pass-fail paper, I met with an external examiner and the lecturer, and we talked through. And the end of it was the external examiner telling the lecturer that they weren't doing their job properly, and I should have been far, far above that level. but it was that conversation that gave you a chance to be able to articulate what maybe you didn't get down on paper.
Yeah, I think there are many, many strengths in having a dialogue, because people get nervous, or you know what it is, you make a mistake on a paper and you scribble out and you freak out. Now, in a way, an oral exam is a little bit more intimidating, but I think good and wise examiners know how to make the candidates feel comfortable. And there's that opportunity to revisit something. And if the student isn't quite clear on saying something, in a gentle way, the examiner can probe a bit and test, do they really understand it, or are they a bit weak? It makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, it also, I think it's still the way in which a lot of the elite universities still wish to appoint their students as well. So I think it's just interesting just coming forward with some different, we're sort of stuck in a bit of a rut, I think, with regard to the process. And I think what you're doing is starting to challenge some of the principles under which it's all undertaken. So it's heartening to hear that there are different ways of doing it.
Well, there's one different thing that Ofqual could do tomorrow for this year. They really could. Supposing every certificate now says at the bottom in big letters, Ofqual warning, the grades on this certificate are reliable only to one grade either way. Those are Ofqual's own words. Dame Glenys Stacey, 2nd of September 2020. At least then everyone would know what they're dealing with. And, they would trust them to one grade either way, but that would be so much more honest than the pretense that what you're looking at is actually, reliable.
Well, what a fantastic first spotlight for us. Thank you so much, Dennis. And
Thanks, Dennis.
The book is well worth reading. Missing the Mark, Dennis Sherwood. Why so many
hold it up, Frank.
grades are wrong. Well, if I hold it up, it always comes around the wrong way.
No, it does to you, but not
it does to you, but not to you. So there we are. So Missing the Mark. Well thumbed. I mean, my wife was wondering, what the hell are you reading when we were away on holiday? But it was a holiday read for me. So thank you, Dennis. And I'd encourage everybody to read it and also to sort of do what you can to bring this matter to a head. And I'm sure Dennis would be more than keen to take emails and whatever if you've got an opinion or you've got some influence, he'd be very interested to hear from you. So thank you very much, Dennis. Thank you, Stan. Our first spotlight. Yeah. What a great one. So standards been set high with no grade boundaries when we assess these. They're all good.
Well, thank you, Frank and Stan, so much, and thank you, everyone watching this.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.